Black CEO removed from VIP seat. Fires crew in 60 seconds. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get into today's story. It was a typical Thursday morning at a luxury airport lounge, the kind of place where the rich and powerful go to wait for their private jets to take them to exotic destinations. The plush leather chairs, polished marble floors, and quiet hum of conversation set the scene for what seemed like an ordinary day. But little did anyone know, the calm was about to be shattered. Vanessa Clark, the CEO of Summit Enterprises, walked into the lounge with a quiet confidence. Dressed in a simple dark blue blouse, black pants, and minimal accessories, she looked like just another businesswoman passing through. But no one could have known that she was the owner of the very company that owned the private terminal she was in. As she approached the front desk, she requested access to the VIP lounge. The receptionist barely glanced at her before directing her toward the glass-partitioned room. But as she sat down, the atmosphere shifted. Moments later, the branch manager, a tall blonde woman named Lisa, approached her. Lisa's demeanor was cold, professional, but there was something about her tone that set Vanessa on edge. "I'm sorry, but we're going to need to verify your account," Lisa said, her voice flat. "We can't let anyone access the VIP lounge without confirmation." Vanessa didn't flinch. She had been in situations like this before, and she knew exactly how to handle it. She handed over her business card and a tablet showing the necessary verification documents. But Lisa didn't seem convinced. "This doesn't look right. You'll need to give us a few more details," Lisa said, not even looking at the documents. Vanessa could feel the judgment in the air. She wasn't just being questioned about her account. She was being profiled. The nerve of it. This wasn't the first time she had faced such discrimination. Years ago when she was building her empire, she had faced similar doubts and barriers simply because of her appearance. But today was different. She wasn't the same young woman who had struggled to be taken seriously. She was a billionaire now, and she wasn't going to let anyone treat her like this. As Lisa began to make excuses, a man in a gray suit walked past and muttered loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Don't you think she belongs in a place like this?" Vanessa remained silent, but inside, the anger was bubbling up. The humiliation, the microaggressions, it was all too familiar. She had heard this tone before, and she was tired of it. She looked around the lounge, taking in the murmurs of the few clients who had begun to notice the interaction. There were eyes on her, but she wasn't going to let them decide her worth. "Excuse me," Vanessa said, her voice calm but firm. "I don't think you understand who I am." Lisa raised an eyebrow, clearly uninterested. That was the moment Vanessa knew she had to act. She wasn't just going to leave and let them continue their judgment. No, today would be the day everything changed. She pulled out her phone and dialed her assistant, Carla. "Carla, initiate phase 6. "Let's handle this," she said, her voice steady. Carla, on the other end of the line, didn't hesitate. "Understood, ma'am," she replied. "Protocol 6 is activated." Vanessa hung up the phone and stood up. The atmosphere in the lounge had shifted from casual to tense. She knew that within the next few minutes, the truth would be revealed. And when it was, there would be no going back. What happened next would leave everyone in the lounge stunned and wondering how a simple interaction could turn into a life-changing moment for all involved. Vanessa stood there for a moment, her mind focused and calm. The lounge, once filled with the hum of casual conversation, was now still, as if holding its breath. Lisa, the branch manager, had taken a step back, still unsure of what to make of the situation. Vanessa could feel the eyes of the few clients who were now watching her, but she didn't care. She had been in worse situations, but this was different. She wasn't just some random businesswoman being scrutinized anymore. She was the CEO of one of the most powerful conglomerates in the country, and today they would know it. As she dialed Carla, her executive assistant, and quietly instructed her to initiate phase 6, Vanessa could feel the weight of her own power. Carla, always prepared for situations like this, responded immediately, her voice crisp. "Understood, ma'am. Protocol 6 is activated." Vanessa hung up the phone and stood taller, a quiet resolve building within her. Lisa continued to hover, uncertainty beginning to seep into her actions. Vanessa could sense the shift in the air. Lisa was starting to realize that something was very wrong here. The power dynamic had already started to tilt. Without saying a word, Vanessa turned to the rest of the room. The few people who had been watching her interaction with Lisa were now starting to murmur among themselves. They sensed the tension too. Some people glanced at their phones, no doubt looking up her name, trying to figure out why the woman in front of them seemed so calm, yet so powerful. Vanessa smiled slightly to herself, knowing exactly what was about to unfold. The room was about to get a lot quieter. "Excuse me, Lisa," Vanessa said, her voice steady and commanding. "I think there's been a mistake." Lisa, still processing, glanced back at her with narrowed eyes. "A mistake?" she repeated, her voice sharp. "Yes," Vanessa replied, her tone never wavering. "A big one." And with that, Vanessa took a step forward, leaving behind the confusion that had surrounded her in the past few minutes. She walked toward the back corner of the lounge, past the few remaining clients who were now whispering among themselves. As she reached the small desk by the window, she opened her bag and pulled out a small folder, one that contained all the information she needed to make this moment hers. She opened it slowly and placed it on the counter in front of Lisa. The documents inside were clear. They contained proof of Vanessa's ownership, her financial records, and most importantly, the legal documents that confirmed Summit Enterprises' acquisition of this very bank just 2 years ago. Lisa hesitated, looking at the papers in front of her as if they might bite her. I don't understand," she stammered, her confidence cracking for the first time. Vanessa didn't speak. She let the silence hang there, thick and heavy. The longer Lisa stood there, the more she seemed to crumble under the weight of her own ignorance. Vanessa knew that Lisa had probably seen dozens of people come through the lounge in the same way, dressed casually, their clothes nothing special. But she had made the fatal mistake of assuming that this woman was just another wealthy person trying to blend in. Vanessa wasn't just wealthy. She was the owner of the entire terminal. "You called me a fraud," Vanessa said suddenly, her voice slicing through the silence like a knife. "You called me a fraud in the very building I own." It wasn't a shout. It didn't need to be. The words carried power on their own. The room froze. Even the few remaining clients who hadn't been paying attention were now focused on the exchange. Lisa blinked, her eyes wide with shock, her mouth opening and closing as if she didn't know what to say. But Vanessa wasn't finished. "I could have walked away," she continued. "I could have left quietly, accepted the fact that you doubted me, but I won't. Not this time. Not anymore." The room seemed to tighten as Vanessa spoke. She wasn't just talking to Lisa anymore. She was talking to everyone who had ever been judged or overlooked simply because of how they looked. "Today," Vanessa said, her voice calm but full of authority, "you're going to understand why you don't get to treat people like this. Not under my roof." At that moment, her phone buzzed softly in her hand. She didn't need to look to know what it was. Carla had already executed the protocol. She could feel the ripple of action spreading through the system. Within minutes, Vanessa would have the full backing of her company, and everything that had just happened would be documented. No one would ever forget the moment they tried to humiliate the wrong person. Lisa looked down at the papers in front of her, her face pale now, realizing the enormity of what she had done. She started to say, but her words were lost in the overwhelming weight of her mistake. Vanessa stood still, watching her for a moment longer. Then she turned her gaze toward the rest of the room, the people who had been watching this unfold. They had witnessed an injustice, and now they were witnessing its resolution. "This is what happens," Vanessa said to them, her voice carrying across the room. "This is what happens when we let bias run unchecked. But today that ends. Right here." She turned back to Lisa, who was still standing there, speechless. "You're fired," Vanessa said simply. "And I'm making sure this never happens again." The words hung in the air for a moment before the room seemed to exhale collectively. Lisa didn't speak. She didn't have to. The power had already shifted, and Vanessa was in control. The battle had been won, and the war had just begun. Vanessa watched as Lisa stood frozen, her mouth still open in disbelief. The tension in the room was palpable. It had all happened so quickly. A simple request had turned into an explosive revelation, and now the entire atmosphere had shifted. The few remaining clients who had been quietly observing the interaction were no longer just passive bystanders. They were witnesses to something much bigger. The eyes that had once regarded Vanessa with indifference were now filled with curiosity and, for some, awe. She could feel the weight of their gaze on her, but it didn't faze her. She was far beyond their judgment now. She had made her stand, and the power was hers. Lisa, still stunned, fumbled for words. She tried to regain her composure, but it was clear she didn't know where to start. Vanessa didn't give her a chance to recover. She turned toward the lounge door, pulling her phone out of her bag once again. This time, she dialed Carla without hesitation. Carla, I need you to move forward with the full audit for this branch. I want every record, every complaint, every action logged. Get legal involved immediately. Her voice was firm, direct. Carla responded quickly. Understood, ma'am. I'm on it now. Vanessa hung up and turned back to the room, her calm demeanor unchanged. It was almost as if nothing had happened, but deep down, she knew that everything was about to change. You've made a big mistake, Lisa, Vanessa said, her voice cutting through the silence. And it's not just going to cost you your job. It's going to cost this entire branch its reputation. Lisa's face went pale as the gravity of Vanessa's words sank in. She stammered, I didn't know. I thought. Vanessa didn't let her finish. You assumed. You judged me based on what I looked like, on how I was dressed. You thought you could treat me like an outsider because I didn't fit your image of who belongs in this space. Well, let me remind you. This space is mine. I built it. I own it. Vanessa paused, letting those words hang in the air for a moment. Lisa's eyes widened as realization hit. She had seen people come into the lounge, dressed casually, and assumed they were just wealthy travelers trying to blend in. But Vanessa was no ordinary guest. Vanessa was the CEO, and she wasn't about to let anyone treat her as if she didn't belong. I will make sure that every single one of you who participated in this will be held accountable, Vanessa continued. This kind of behavior cannot and will not be tolerated. Not here, not anywhere under my watch. Lisa took a hesitant step back, but she knew she had already lost. Vanessa's words had hit her like a freight train, and now, there was no escaping the consequences. Vanessa could see the fear creeping into her eyes, the flicker of doubt, but it was too late. Lisa had crossed a line, and there would be no going back for her. The other employees in the lounge, those who had stood by in silence or whispered judgment, now looked away, unwilling to meet Vanessa's gaze. The shift had been so quick, so total, that they couldn't even pretend to play along with the facade anymore. They knew the power had changed hands. You're all complicit, Vanessa said, her voice rising just enough to command their attention. And you all will pay the price for it. Not with your words, but with your actions. You're going to learn what happens when you fail to recognize the worth of those around you. At that moment, Vanessa's phone buzzed again. She didn't need to check it. She knew it was Carla confirming the first steps of the protocol. The company's legal team was already processing everything. The audit had begun. Vanessa felt a sense of satisfaction wash over her, but it wasn't for her. It was for the future where no one would dare underestimate someone simply based on their appearance. I'm going to make sure that everyone here knows exactly what you did. Every client who witnessed this will be informed. Vanessa continued, her eyes sweeping across the room. I'll ensure that every single one of you understands what true respect looks like. Lisa didn't speak. She couldn't. The truth had been laid bare, and there was no way to deny it. Vanessa turned her attention to the remaining clients, who were now looking at her with a mix of shock, admiration, and, for some, even respect. She knew that the moment was critical. This wasn't just about a small interaction at a bank. This was about sending a message. I didn't have to raise my voice. I didn't need to make a scene, Vanessa said, her voice softening slightly. But sometimes, you have to make people listen. Sometimes, you have to make them see. Vanessa turned to leave, but before she could take another step, she heard someone speak. We're with you, a voice said from the back of the room. It was one of the clients who had been watching the entire exchange. The others were nodding, slowly at first, but then more firmly. The atmosphere in the room shifted once again, and Vanessa realized that, in that moment, she wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for every person who had ever been overlooked, underestimated, or discriminated against. She walked out of the lounge with her head held high, knowing that this was only the beginning. The rest of the day would be spent ensuring that this incident was never forgotten, and more importantly, that it never happened again. Vanessa walked out of the VIP lounge, her steps measured, her head held high. The air outside was sharp, the contrast from the tension inside still fresh in her mind. But as she made her way through the terminal, she felt the satisfaction that only comes with knowing you've done the right thing. It wasn't just about the power she wielded, but about the message she'd sent, a message that would resonate far beyond the walls of this bank. As she passed the front desk, she caught the eye of the receptionist, who had witnessed the entire exchange. The young woman's gaze was now full of respect, and Vanessa offered her a nod. She could feel the shift in the room, the weight of her actions settling into place. This was just the beginning. The ripple effect had already started. As Vanessa reached the exit, her phone buzzed once again. She pulled it out and saw Carla's name flashing. On the screen, "It's done." Carla's voice came through immediately. "The audit is live. Legal is reviewing everything. We're good to move forward with the full investigation." Vanessa smiled to keep the pressure on. It wasn't just about firing a few employees. This was about changing the culture. Vanessa was determined to root out every ounce of bias in the company, and she wasn't going to stop until that was done. Her mind shifted back to the lounge, the faces of the employees who had watched in silence. She had seen the fear in their eyes. They knew, deep down, that things had just changed. The system that had allowed discrimination to fester for so long was about to be dismantled. And Vanessa was going to be the one leading the charge. As the day went on, word started to spread. News outlets began reporting on the incident, with interviews from clients who had witnessed the exchange. Many expressed admiration for how Vanessa had handled the situation, how she had used her power and position to bring about real change. Some questioned how such behavior could have gone unnoticed for so long. But for Vanessa, it didn't matter what the media said. What mattered was that the people who had witnessed her stand up for herself and for others had been given a lesson in respect and justice. She knew that this moment would stay with them forever. As the day turned to evening, Vanessa made a decision. It wasn't enough to just change one company. She wanted to make a larger impact. Her vision was clear now. She would build a legacy not just for her company, but for the world. A legacy where power was used to uplift, not suppress. Where respect was a given, not earned. And she would make sure that everyone, no matter their position or background, would be treated with the dignity they deserved. As she looked out her office window, the city lights flickered in the distance. Vanessa knew she had only just begun. The road ahead would be difficult, but she was ready. She had learned that silence wasn't a strategy. Action was. And she had taken the first step in what would be a long journey toward real change. The next few days were a blur of action for Vanessa. The media had picked up the story, and the world was watching. What had started as a simple confrontation in a bank lounge had snowballed into a much larger conversation about power, respect, and the systemic issues that were still deeply rooted in society. Vanessa sat at her desk, eyes scanning through the flood of messages, emails, and press clippings that had come through. Every outlet, from local news stations to national programs, wanted a piece of her story. But she wasn't interested in the spotlight. She had already made her point. Now, it was time to make sure that change was implemented. The press reports were full of praise for her calm and composed handling of the situation. They highlighted how she had used her position not just to defend herself, but to dismantle the outdated, discriminatory systems that had allowed such behavior to flourish. Some articles questioned how something like this could happen in a corporate setting, especially in a company as high-profile as Summit Enterprises. But Vanessa knew this was only the beginning. She had already instructed Carla to take charge of the internal investigation, ensuring that every detail of the incident was logged and reviewed. Legal teams had been notified, and a full audit of the bank's operations was underway. No stone would be left unturned. The goal wasn't just to fire a few employees. It was to root out every trace of bias and unfair treatment that had been allowed to persist for far too long. She couldn't let the system continue unchecked. Carla's update came through later that day, confirming that the investigation was in full swing. "I've got everything in motion," Carla reported. "The audit team is already reviewing all the records, and we've started contacting clients who were in the lounge that day to get their statements. Legal is preparing the next steps." Vanessa nodded as she listened. This was exactly what she had expected. No delay, no excuses. Good. Let's keep this moving. she said, her voice calm but resolute. I want all results by the end of the week. I want to start making the changes as soon as possible. As soon as the call ended, Vanessa turned her attention back to the bigger picture. She couldn't afford to let the media frenzy distract her. She knew that if she was going to make a real difference, she needed to take what had happened and use it as a catalyst for broader change. The bank was just the beginning. Summit Enterprises was a massive corporation with holdings in various industries. If she could change the culture within the bank, she could extend that influence throughout her entire organization and beyond. But that kind of shift wasn't going to happen overnight. It would take time, commitment, and the courage to make difficult decisions. Vanessa's phone buzzed again. This time, it was an update from her HR team. We've identified a pattern of complaints related to discrimination in other departments. The message read, "We believe there are systemic issues within Summit that need to be addressed." Vanessa leaned back in her chair, taking a deep breath. This was exactly what she had feared. The incident at the bank was not an isolated one. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that this wasn't just about changing one company's practices. It was about changing the entire corporate landscape. Vanessa immediately dialed Carla. "Give me everything you can on those complaints," she said. "We need to identify where the issues are, and we need to fix them. Not tomorrow. Today." The investigation had to go deeper. Summit Enterprises was going to be held accountable, not just in public, but within its walls. No employee, no matter their position, was going to be allowed to perpetuate bias or discrimination in any form. The conversation with Carla ended quickly. Vanessa stood up and paced the room, thinking through the next steps. She knew this wasn't going to be easy. People would resist change, especially when it threatened the comfort of those who had benefited from the status quo. But she wasn't going to back down. She had spent years building this empire, and she would not let it crumble because of outdated, prejudiced views. As the day wore on, Vanessa's thoughts were interrupted by a knock at her office door. It was one of her top executives, Jason, who had been with Summit Enterprises for years. He had seen the company grow and evolve under Vanessa's leadership, but today, his expression was serious, almost apprehensive. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" he asked, stepping inside. Vanessa motioned for him to sit. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Jason hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I've been with Summit for a long time, and I've always respected you. But there's been talk in the ranks. People are nervous. About the changes. About the direction you're taking." Vanessa looked him in the eye, her gaze steady. "Jason, let me make this clear. I'm not here to make people comfortable. I'm here to make this company better. We've been running for years on a system that rewards the wrong things, that ignores too many voices. If people are nervous, it's because they're afraid of being held accountable." Jason sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I get that. But some of the employees are worried about their jobs. They don't know what's coming next. They don't know if they're going to have a place in this company after the changes you're implementing." Vanessa leaned forward, her voice firm. "If people are afraid of losing their jobs because they've been treating others unfairly, then they should be worried. But if they're willing to change, if they're willing to learn, then they'll have a place here. This isn't about firing people. This is about creating a company where everyone can thrive. But I won't let anyone who perpetuates discrimination continue to work here. That's non-negotiable." Jason nodded slowly, understanding the weight of her words. "I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. The changes you're making, they're big. They're going to take time. People need to know that they're part of the solution, not just part of the problem." Vanessa smiled slightly. "And that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'll make sure everyone understands the role they have to play in this. But this isn't just about policy. It's about values. And that starts with me. It starts with my leadership." Jason nodded again, standing up to leave. "I'm with you, Vanessa. I always have been." As he left, Vanessa felt a sense of satisfaction. The conversation had gone better than she expected. Jason had always been a reliable ally, and now it seemed like he was on board with the changes she was making. The road ahead would be challenging, but with people like Jason in her corner, she knew she could accomplish anything. She turned back to her desk, ready to take the next step in her journey. This wasn't just about her success. It was about creating a legacy that would change the world for the better. The days that followed were a whirlwind of action. Vanessa barely had time to breathe between meetings, press briefings, and internal calls. But as the dust started to settle, she knew the real work was just beginning. The media had moved on to the next story, But what happened in the bank lounge was far from over. Her plan to reshape Summit Enterprises and challenge the corporate culture that had long perpetuated bias was now in full swing. Carla kept her updated on the investigation. Every department was being reviewed, from the banking staff to the higher-ups who had allowed a toxic work environment to thrive. The audit was extensive, and Vanessa was determined to make sure nothing was overlooked. As the head of the company, she had the power to make the changes she needed. But Vanessa knew it would take more than just policies and procedures. It was going to take a cultural shift, a complete reset. One afternoon, as she sat in her office, reviewing more reports, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Jason. "We need to talk. It's about the upcoming town hall meeting." Vanessa sighed. She had been expecting this. The company-wide town hall had been scheduled for the following week, and she knew there were going to be difficult conversations. "Jason, I'll be there in 30 minutes, she texted back. She needed to make sure her vision was clear to everyone at Summit Enterprises, from the top executives to the new hires. No one could afford to be in the dark anymore. She arrived at the conference room, where Jason was already waiting for her. His expression was serious, but there was also a hint of respect. He had always been a loyal ally, but even he had questions about the changes she was pushing for. "Vanessa, I think we're all on the same page about the direction we want to go in. But you know this is going to be a hard sell for some of the staff. People are going to push back, especially the ones who've been here for years and have seen things done the same way for so long." Vanessa nodded. "I know, but it's time for things to change. We can't keep letting this kind of behavior go unchecked. We've seen the consequences of that. I can't afford to let Summit Enterprises continue down this path." Jason sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "I agree. But some of the people we're dealing with are used to a certain level of privilege. They're not going to take kindly to being told that their actions have consequences. They've been in power for so long." Vanessa stood up, walking to the window and staring out at the city skyline. "I didn't get to where I am by playing it safe, Jason. I'm not going to start now. These changes are necessary, and I'm willing to take whatever heat comes my way. But I won't back down. I refuse to let this company, my company, be a breeding ground for discrimination." Jason looked at her, clearly impressed by her resolve. "You're right," he said after a pause. "You've already made a lot of powerful moves, and I believe in what you're doing. It's just, we need a plan for how to manage the backlash. We can't afford to lose the support of the people who've been here since day one." Vanessa smiled, her determination unwavering. "That's exactly why we're having this conversation. We need to bring everyone on board. But it's not about convincing them that this change is the right thing to do. It's about showing them that this is the future, whether they like it or not." Jason nodded. "And how do you plan to do that?" Vanessa turned around, facing him with a confident smile. "Through action. I'm not going to tell them what's wrong. I'm going to show them. At the town hall, I'll make it clear that we're starting with a clean slate. Those who want to be part of the new Summit Enterprises, those who want to be part of a company built on respect and accountability, will stay. And those who can't get on board, they'll have to find somewhere else to work." Jason's eyes widened. "You're going to fire people right there? In front of everyone?" Vanessa's expression hardened. "I'm not here to play games, Jason. This is bigger than just firing a few employees. This is about setting a precedent. We can't afford to let anyone think that old habits will be tolerated just because they've been part of the company for years. This is my company now, and I'm going to make sure it reflects the values I stand for." Jason looked impressed, but there was still a trace of concern in his eyes. "You've got the right idea, but it's going to be tough. We'll need a strategy to make sure the message gets across the right way." Vanessa walked over to the table and grabbed a stack of documents. "I've already got a plan. Carla and the legal team have been working on it. We'll start with the town hall. Everyone will get a chance to voice their opinions, but I'll make it clear that the old way of doing things is no longer acceptable. After that, we'll begin the process of restructuring. Some people will be let go, but more importantly, everyone will be retrained. We'll set clear expectations for what's acceptable behavior and what isn't." Jason nodded, his expression softening. "I think this is the right move. It's just going to take time for people to adjust. But if anyone can lead this company through it, it's you." Vanessa gave him a firm nod. "Thanks, Jason. I can't do this alone. We'll need all the support we can get. But the end goal is worth it. We're going to make Summit Enterprises a place where everyone, no matter their background, has an equal shot. Where talent, not appearance, defines success." Jason smiled. Then let's get to work. As Vanessa left the conference room, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead would be long and challenging, but she was ready. She had a vision, and she wasn't going to let anything stand in her way. Summit Enterprises would be a place where everyone could thrive, and she would make sure that vision became a reality. Vanessa stood at the front of the large auditorium, facing the rows of employees gathered for the long-anticipated town hall meeting. She had spent the last few days preparing for this moment, knowing it would be one of the most crucial points in her journey to reshape Summit Enterprises. The room was filled with a mixture of emotions: nervousness, anticipation, and, for some, uncertainty about what was to come. As Vanessa scanned the crowd, she couldn't help but notice the anxious glances exchanged between employees. This was the moment they would finally hear her vision for the company, and she had no intention of sugarcoating it. She had made it clear to her team that the company's culture needed to change, but now it was time to deliver the message face to face. The room fell silent as Vanessa stepped up to the microphone. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. This wasn't just a speech, it was a turning point. "Good afternoon, everyone," she began, her voice clear and strong. "I know many of you have been waiting for this moment. We've all seen the changes happening around us, and I know some of you are wondering what that means for the future of Summit Enterprises. I'm here today to make sure we are all on the same page." She paused, looking out at the sea of faces before her. "For too long, we've allowed outdated systems, biases, and discrimination to run unchecked. We've allowed some employees to thrive while others were overlooked simply because of who they are, how they look, or where they come from. That ends today." Vanessa's words landed like a shockwave through the room. She could feel the tension shift as employees processed what she was saying. Some looked uncomfortable, others uncertain, but there were also nods from those who had been waiting for this moment. "I've already made the necessary changes within our organization," Vanessa continued. "We've begun a full audit of all departments, and we're identifying where we've failed to uphold the standards of fairness and respect. This company will no longer tolerate discrimination in any form." A murmur rippled through the room. Vanessa let it pass, knowing that the real challenge was yet to come. "But," she said, her voice rising, "the responsibility doesn't just lie with the people at the top. It lies with all of us. Everyone here has a role to play in creating the kind of culture we want to build, a culture of inclusivity, where talent and integrity matter more than appearance or background." She paused again, letting her words sink in. "But that's not enough. I'm not here just to tell you what's wrong. I'm here to show you what's next. We're going to make Summit Enterprises a place where everyone can thrive. But if you can't get on board with this vision, if you can't commit to changing the way we do business, then it's time to part ways." The room went completely still. Vanessa could feel the weight of her statement hanging in the air. She knew there were people in the room who would resist these changes. She also knew that there would be some who wouldn't be able to accept the new direction of the company. "I won't shy away from the difficult decisions," Vanessa said, her voice steady. "I'll be making sure that everyone here understands that accountability starts with action, not just words. And if that means letting some people go, then so be it." She took a breath, allowing her words to settle. She wasn't done yet. "We're also implementing mandatory training programs for every employee. These programs will focus on diversity, inclusion, and unconscious bias. We'll be working with experts in the field to ensure that we're not just talking about change, but living it every day." Vanessa's eyes swept over the crowd once more, her gaze unwavering. "I'm not asking anyone to be perfect. We all have biases. We all have room to grow. But what I am asking is for everyone to be part of the solution. For everyone to take responsibility for the part they play in creating a company that reflects the values we all claim to hold." The silence in the room was deafening, but Vanessa wasn't deterred. She had known it would be like this. She had expected pushback, but she wasn't going to let it stop her. "I've already begun making changes at the top," she said. "And I've made it clear to my leadership team that anyone who doesn't align with our new values won't have a place here. But this isn't just about the executives. It's about all of us, from the bottom to the top. If you can't embrace the changes we're making, then it's time for you to find another opportunity." At this, a few murmurs of discontent spread through the crowd, but Vanessa pressed on, her voice unwavering. "I won't apologize for wanting better for this company. I won't apologize for wanting a workplace where people are treated with respect and dignity. And I won't apologize for holding myself and every one of you to the highest standard. This is the future of Summit Enterprises, and it's non-negotiable. She took a moment to let the room absorb what she had said. She could see the mixed emotions on the faces of her employees: confusion, fear, and even some resistance. But beneath it all, there was something else: recognition. They knew that change was coming, and they knew it would be hard. But they also knew that Vanessa wasn't backing down. "I'm here to lead this company into a new era," Vanessa concluded. "And I'm not doing it alone. I need each and every one of you to help me build the future we deserve. The future of Summit Enterprises is in our hands. And together, we'll make sure it's one that we can all be proud of." With that, she stepped back from the microphone, her eyes scanning the room once more. She could feel the weight of her words, but she also felt the power of her conviction. This was the moment everything changed, and she was ready for whatever came next. The weeks that followed the town hall were a blur of change and adaptation. Summit Enterprises had started its transformation, but the road ahead was anything but smooth. While Vanessa had been clear in her message, the real test was in how people reacted to the new policies. Resistance was inevitable, and Vanessa knew that the path to true change would be met with some level of discomfort. But she was prepared for that. The internal audits were revealing deep-seated issues, some of them even more troubling than she had anticipated. As the weeks passed, more and more cases of discrimination, bias, and inequality surfaced. The deeper the investigation went, the more Vanessa realized just how ingrained these behaviors were within the organization. It wasn't just about the employees who had been dismissed. It was about the entire system that had allowed this kind of behavior to persist for so long. She had expected some pushback from the staff, but what truly surprised her were the allies who came forward. Some employees who had been hesitant at first, those who feared the changes, began to speak up. They shared their stories of discrimination, how they had seen things happening but never felt empowered to act. Vanessa listened to every one of them. She knew that listening was the first step in building trust. Slowly but surely, she saw the culture of the company begin to shift. It wasn't an overnight transformation, but it was progress. One morning, as she sat in her office reviewing more reports, she received a message from Carla. The internal audit had been completed, and the results were staggering. "Vanessa, we've found a pattern. It's not just a few isolated incidents. This is systemic," Carla wrote. "The culture has been toxic for years. It's time to act." Vanessa set the report down, her mind racing. The depth of the problem was beyond what she had imagined, but she knew what needed to be done. She couldn't turn back now. That evening, she convened a meeting with her leadership team. Jason, Carla, and other key executives sat around the table, their faces serious. "We've got a long way to go," Vanessa began, her voice steady. "The audit is complete, and the results are clear. We can't continue like this. We need to make a statement, both internally and externally. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. This is going to be painful for some people, but we have no other choice. We need to clean house." Jason nodded. "We're with you, Vanessa. But how do we make sure this doesn't backfire? There's a lot of fear among the employees. They want change, but they're also scared of what that might mean for them." Vanessa leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. "I get that. Change is always scary, especially when it means confronting uncomfortable truths. But we can't afford to back down. We're going to start by holding everyone accountable. No one is exempt from the new standards. Not the executives, not the middle managers, and certainly not the staff." Carla spoke up. "What about the external messaging? If we start firing people, we'll need to have a solid narrative for the press. People will want to know why we're taking such drastic actions." Vanessa nodded. "We're going to be transparent. We're going to tell them exactly why this is happening and how we're committed to building a more inclusive, respectful, and accountable company. We've been complacent for too long, and now it's time to act." She paused, her eyes scanning the room. "This isn't just about firing people. It's about setting a new tone for Summit Enterprises. We're going to lead by example. The kind of company I want to build doesn't tolerate discrimination. Period." The room fell silent for a moment, everyone digesting what Vanessa had just said. They all knew the magnitude of the decision, but they also knew that it was the right one. The following week, Vanessa addressed the entire company once again, this time in a more formal setting. She stood at the front of a packed conference room, facing the employees who had once questioned her leadership. Now, they were ready to listen. You've heard me say this before. Vanessa began, her voice calm but firm. But I'm saying it again because it bears repeating. We are making a change. Summit Enterprises is no longer a place where bias and discrimination are tolerated. We're implementing a zero-tolerance policy for any form of inequality, and I mean any form. The changes we're making are not optional. They're necessary. She let her words sink in before continuing. For those of you who are unwilling to commit to these changes, I need to be clear. You have no place in this company. We're taking a hard stance on this. We will be identifying individuals who have perpetuated these behaviors, and they will be held accountable. This is not just about firing people. This is about making sure that we never let this happen again. The room was tense, but Vanessa stood tall, her resolve unwavering. She had expected some pushback, but she also knew that this was the moment of reckoning. For the first time in years, Summit Enterprises would be forced to confront its own biases head-on. As the meeting ended, Vanessa felt a wave of uncertainty wash over her. The road ahead was long, and not everyone would accept the changes. But she knew she had made the right decision. The next few weeks would be crucial. She would have to prove, not just to the company but to herself, that this wasn't just a moment. It was the beginning of a lasting transformation. And no matter how difficult the journey, Vanessa was ready for it. She would continue to fight for what was right, for what she had always believed in. Fairness, respect, and the belief that everyone deserved a seat at the table. The months that followed were a period of intense transformation for Summit Enterprises. The changes Vanessa had set in motion were not immediate, but they were undeniable. The culture of the company, which had once been rife with complacency and bias, began to shift towards something new, something that reflected the values Vanessa had fought for. The town hall meeting had been a pivotal moment, a clear declaration of her intentions, but the real work was in the daily efforts that followed. The audit was completed, the investigations into discriminatory practices were thorough, and the consequences for those involved were swift and resolute. People who had long turned a blind eye to injustice were now facing the truth. Some chose to leave on their own accord, unable or unwilling to adapt to the new vision for the company. Others, who had been complicit in the system, were let go. It was painful, but Vanessa knew it was necessary. She had made it clear that Summit Enterprises would no longer be a place where bias and inequality thrived. This wasn't just about one or two employees. It was about changing the entire structure, creating a company that valued respect, fairness, and inclusion. As she watched the changes unfold, Vanessa couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come. It had not been an easy journey, but it had been worth it. She had faced doubts, resistance, and moments of frustration, but every challenge had only fueled her determination. She knew that this was just the beginning. The work would never truly be done, but she had set the foundation for a better, more equitable future for Summit Enterprises. One afternoon, as Vanessa sat at her desk reviewing progress reports, she received a call from Carla. "Vanessa, I've got some good news," Carla said. "We've received positive feedback from several departments. People are starting to buy into the changes. They see that this isn't just a temporary shift, it's the future of the company." Vanessa leaned back in her chair, a sense of relief washing over her. "That's great to hear, Carla. It's not going to be easy, but we're on the right path. Let's keep pushing forward." As the conversation continued, Vanessa couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of purpose. The journey was far from over, but the momentum was building. Summit Enterprises was becoming the company she had always envisioned. It was a company where people were judged by their abilities, not their appearance. Where everyone had a fair chance to succeed. That evening, Vanessa stood on the balcony of her penthouse, looking out at the city below. The skyline stretched out before her, a testament to the hard work and sacrifices that had brought her to this point. She thought about all the times she had been told she couldn't do something, all the times she had been overlooked, judged, or dismissed because of her appearance. But she had never let those voices define her. She had carved her own path, built her own empire, and now, she was leading the way for others to do the same. In that moment, she knew that Summit Enterprises was more than just a business. It was a platform for change. It was a place where the status quo no longer had control, where new opportunities were available to those who had been excluded for too long. Vanessa smiled, knowing that she had created something that would last far beyond her own tenure. The next day, she called a meeting with her leadership team. They had made incredible progress, but Vanessa wasn't satisfied yet. We've come a long way, but this isn't the end. This is just the beginning of a larger movement, she said. We're going to continue to lead by example. We're going to keep pushing the envelope. We've set the tone for this company, but now we need to set the tone for the entire industry. We're going to make Summit Enterprises a model for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we're going to make sure that this company leads the way in making lasting change in corporate America. Jason, one of her top executives, spoke up. Vanessa, you've done something incredible here. But I think we need to start looking at how we can influence the broader industry. We've set a high bar for ourselves, but the work isn't just about internal change. We need to lead the conversation beyond these walls. Vanessa nodded. You're right. It's time to take this message outside. Summit Enterprises is going to be the example of what happens when a company takes a stand. We're going to lead the charge in transforming not just our own culture, but the entire industry. We can't do this alone, but if we work together, we can show the world that change is possible. The team around her was energized, and for the first time, Vanessa felt like the company she had built was truly aligned with her values. It was a powerful moment. Summit Enterprises wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. It was an example of what could happen when a company decided to take responsibility for its actions and transform itself from the inside out. Vanessa had done what so many thought was impossible. She had created a company where everyone had a voice, where fairness and respect were non-negotiable, and where the power of leadership was used to elevate, not suppress. As the meeting ended, Vanessa looked around the room, feeling the weight of the responsibility she had taken on. But this time, there was no fear. There was only confidence. Summit Enterprises had become more than just a business. It had become a movement, and she was leading it.